This is the story of a friend of mine. He was working for a Christian organization which he had moved overseas to join. I know from a number of sources within the organization he was doing his work well, thriving in fact. Unfortunately, although his colleagues and his immediate boss thought he was doing well, the CEO of the organization had taken a dislike to him. There were cross-cultural issues involved in this conflict, but more significantly, the insecurities and personality weaknesses of the CEO seemed to be strongly at play. He began to harshly criticize my friend in private conversations and in emails, even at times exercising power in ways that seemed irrational, unfounded, and abusive. There was no choice for my friend but to leave the organization. My friend later commented rather euphemistically that he had what he called differences in management style. This is episode 2 of our series on Leaving Well. I'm Jools. Welcome to Dchurched.com. After hearing my friend's story, it seemed that there are some parallels with the story of Saul and David. Obviously not a direct one-to-one correspondence, but one or two similarities. Here's the story. In 1 Samuel chapter 18 through to 20, we read of King Saul's descent into leadership paranoia. The young David has become the new wonder kid of Israel. He's killed Goliath and everybody loves him. He sings, he plays a musical instrument, he does a mean job with a sling and a few stones. And people are singing dreamy songs about him. The chorus goes like this: Saul has killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands. That's what passed for a pop song in those days, or maybe it would have been classed as death metal. Saul is jealous of the praise that David is getting. But when he has his manic tantrums, David can sometimes soothe him with his music playing. But with all this praise being placed on David's head, Saul eventually snaps and throws a spear at David and misses. It happens again and David sneaks off. So mad is he that David has fled, Saul throws a spear at his own son, Jonathan, who is also a friend of David. So David flees to the hills on his own. Later in the story, he has an opportunity to kill Saul, but refuses to do so because although David has a sense that he will one day be king, he knows it must occur with integrity and in God's timing. He must not touch the current anointed king. To me, David's story is an illustration of leaving well. He chooses to leave quietly when the spears start to fly. I don't know if you've been in a situation where you've been openly assaulted by a leader. In this situation, it virtually skipped the verbal phase and went straight to physical attacks. It was time to leave. David tells his friend Jonathan not to follow him, even though he could have done with a friend on the lonely road that he's about to take. In fact, he doesn't take anybody with him. Later on, people come to him as they see his integrity and see Saul's declining mental health issues. David doesn't cast aspersions on Saul, even though he is clearly the wrong person. He doesn't let his pain cause him to take revenge or to usurp the role that Saul has. It's interesting also that although he had some ability to calm Saul's mental health issues through his music, David couldn't fix him permanently. Maybe I'm being a bit freewheeling with the text, but it seems to me that knowing what you can and can't control, or what you can and can't fix, is part of knowing if and when it's time to leave. David journals and vents on God. That's what a number of the Psalms are about. Psalms 18, 52, 54, 57, and 59. So if you've left a difficult situation, read some of those Psalms. We see David pouring out his pain to God in them. This is both emotional and life-threatening agony that he goes through. So having said all that about David and Saul, here are my suggestions for leaving in as healthy a way as possible. Firstly, have a good reason for leaving. Before you go, evaluate whether your reasons are good. You may need help with this because if we surround ourselves with our own thoughts, it can be perilous. We can catastrophize about a relationship beyond that which may be necessary. As a first stage, it might be worth writing down precisely what you think the problem or problems are. These probably fall into 3 categories: relational, theological, and leadership praxis. Itemize each issue under each title. Some of them may overlap with one another, but each of those require slightly different responses. Let me say it again: relational, theological, or leadership praxis or practice. That's suggestion 1. Have a good reason to leave. Secondly, decide who is the appropriate person to talk to. Don't spread your pain or hurt around too many people. It's cathartic for a few minutes, but doesn't really solve anything, and it complicates and worsens the issue as we involve others. There may be one confidant that you have who can bring some wisdom and empathy to you. Talk to them. Thirdly, work out relationship issues as best you can. That means owning your part without expecting a reciprocal apology. We say, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. We are not to be in the business of debt collection. Remember, relationship reconciliation is so important so that a root of bitterness doesn't infect our psyche. If somebody won't be reconciled to us or doesn't accept that there is an issue, then sometimes we have to walk away. Fourth thing to say is clarify the problem. Kerry Newhoff highlights this point particularly well. He asks 2 questions. Is it a misunderstanding or a misalignment? A misunderstanding can be clarified. I need to understand what you said when you said X, Y, Z. Trying to understand the other is at the heart of good communication and relationships. Is it a misunderstanding, or are you misaligned? You may come to the conclusion that the way you view the world and the leadership's praxis or theology is fundamentally different to yours. You're a lobster that needs to shed this constrictive shell, and misaligned people never thrive. And because no local church is the entire body of Christ, healthy leadership should actually be excited for you to find a church that better aligns with your understanding of church, your personality, your gifts, and your way of doing things. Of course, this is always a compromise with an ideal world where the church is united and not splintered as it is. But finding a space where you can significantly contribute and be wholeheartedly behind the leadership is vital. Fifth thing, stop trying to change your pastor. This is part of the forgiving debts thing. Forgiving debts is releasing myself of the need to see that person change into what I want them to be. If I can't change myself into all I would like to be, it's really pretty impossible trying to change others. Sixth thing, tell the leaders the truth about why you're leaving, but do it with grace and love. If you possibly can, do it in person, but as I've said earlier, that may not always be the right way forward. I say this as someone who, for the past 35 years or so, has been a church leader. A Dear John conversation is painful, but a Dear John letter without face-to-face is really pretty horrible. Now, sometimes only a letter is possible. Good leaders should be alert to the sense of vulnerability such conversations instill in many. But sometimes people aren't secure enough in their leadership to cope or handle conflict well. In such a situation, a letter may be appropriate. But if you can possibly do face-to-face, bias that way and do it without rancor. The seventh thing I'd like to say is if you've been active in your church, give time for your work to be handed over. It's good stewardship that you act honorably in regard to the responsibilities that you have with the church or organization. Don't just walk out in a huff. Eighth suggestion I make is work on yourself. Continue to do this, because otherwise you will carry personal problems into the next church. There may be some triggers that remind you of past pains. Be alert to those triggers. Name them for what they are. If you sense that trigger coming on, remind yourself this is not the same situation, or this is not the same person. This reminds me of things said and done, but it's not the same. It shows me, if nothing else, that I'm still tender or wounded, and I'm still working through some stuff. There may be other stuff that you need to work on, perhaps your attitude, your expectations of church life. Always remembering that the goal is not to consume the church, but to be the church. So wherever you go next, go to serve humbly. And give yourself time to come up for air after a painful exit. Maybe that means not settling into a new community for a while. But know this, the one who reconciled all things still calls us to connect with others in reconciled community. Discipleship is a shared journey. Now, if none of what I've said in this podcast applied to you because you're just curious about Jesus, well done for listening this far. If you don't already know from this podcast, Jesus' call for people to love one another is not easy. His command to be a Christian community is challenging, but it's part of being a follower, connecting with others and trying to travel together in love. So whatever that looks like for you, whether you're an inquirer or a practicing follower, try and keep connected with others who will keep you honest and keep you walking. My name's Jools. This is Dchurched.com. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like this podcast and join us on our Facebook page.